If you don't do as we say, you're dead to us. My parents spat across the table. And just like that, the people who gave me life decided to erase it. But they had no idea what they'd just unleashed. The words hung in the air like poison, settling into every corner of the dining room I had spent hours preparing. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, surrounded by the warmth of twinkling Christmas lights and the rich aroma of cinnamon and roasted turkey, yet feeling colder than I'd ever felt in my life. I had poured my heart into this evening, baking pies from scratch until my hands were raw, carefully wrapping presents I could barely afford, decorating every surface with the kind of love that only comes from desperate hope. For 26 years, I had been the dutiful daughter. While my friends went to college parties and spring break trips, I worked double shifts at 2 different jobs to keep my parents' failing business afloat. I watched their debt pile up like autumn leaves, and I swept it all away with my own sacrifice. I postponed my dreams, my relationships, my entire future. All for the promise that family meant something, that loyalty would be rewarded, that love was unconditional. I had believed in them so completely that I ignored the warning signs. The way they'd whisper and stop talking when I entered a room, the hushed phone calls that ended abruptly when I walked by, the family meetings that somehow never included me, despite my being the one holding everything together financially. As I set the last plate on the mahogany table that had witnessed countless family dinners, my father's eyes met mine across the flickering candlelight. His gaze was different tonight, calculating, almost predatory. The man who used to read me bedtime stories now looked at me like I was a stranger, or worse, like I was a problem to be solved. "You're not invited to the family trust meeting tomorrow," he said, his voice carrying the kind of casual cruelty that cuts deeper than screaming. The words were delivered with the same tone he might use to comment on the weather, but they landed like a physical blow to my chest. My mother, seated beside him in her emerald green dress, the one I had bought her for her birthday, smiled. It wasn't the warm smile I remembered from childhood, the one that used to make everything okay when I scraped my knee or had a bad day at school. This smile was sharp, victorious, like she had just won a game I didn't even know we were playing. The silence that followed was suffocating. My siblings, my older brother Mark and younger sister Sarah, suddenly found their wine glasses absolutely fascinating, swirling the burgundy liquid as if it held the secrets of the universe. The air grew thick with tension, transforming our cozy family gathering into something that felt more like a trial where I was both the defendant and the only one who didn't know the charges. I felt my throat tighten, but I forced myself to speak. "What trust meeting?" My voice came out smaller than I intended, barely above a whisper. My father leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. "The one where we discuss the future of the family assets. The one where we make decisions about inheritance and business succession." He paused, letting each word sink in like drops of acid. Adult decisions. The implication hit after everything I had sacrificed. After all the years of proving my dedication to this family, they were treating me like a child who couldn't be trusted with grown-up conversations. "Honestly, you were always too naive," my father continued, his voice gaining momentum like a boulder rolling downhill. "You'll never understand business or responsibility. You think throwing money at problems makes them disappear, but that's not how the real world works." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. I was the one who had thrown money at their problems. My money, my sacrifice, my sleepless nights worrying about their debt. But apparently, that made me naive, not selfless. My mother decided to twist the knife deeper. "You're ungrateful and weak," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of contempt usually reserved for strangers who had wronged you. "You'll never be anything without us. We've carried you your entire life. And this is how you repay us? With this entitled attitude?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw their words back at them, to list every sacrifice I had made, every dollar I had contributed, every dream I had deferred for their sake. But something stopped me. Maybe it was shock, Or maybe it was the dawning realization that no amount of evidence would change their minds. They had already decided who I was in their story. The ungrateful daughter, the weak link, the burden. So instead, I sat there, absorbing their venom like a sponge, feeling each insult burn its way into my memory. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for my water glass, the ice clinking against the sides like tiny bells announcing the death of my illusions. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of forced conversation about the weather and holiday plans that apparently didn't include me. I mechanically ate the food I had prepared with such love, each bite tasting like ash in my mouth. My family chatted around me as if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't just announced that I was dead to them unless I fell in line with their mysterious plans. When the evening finally ended, I excused myself with a politeness that felt like armor. "I think I'll turn in early," I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. I walked to my childhood bedroom, the same room where I had dreamed of making my parents proud, where I had planned how to help them succeed. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, finally allowing myself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. My legs gave out, and I slid down the door until I was sitting on the carpet, staring at the photographs on my dresser. Pictures of family vacations, graduation ceremonies, birthday parties. All those moments that I thought were building toward something beautiful, something lasting. With shaking hands, I opened the bottom drawer of my desk, the one with the broken handle that I had never bothered to fix. Inside was a folder I had labeled Important Documents years ago when I first started helping with the family finances. At the time, I thought I was being responsible, keeping copies of everything just in case. I pulled out the thick manila folder and opened it on my bed. Bank statements, loan documents, email printouts, copies of contracts and agreements. Years of financial records that my parents thought were safely hidden in their private files. They had no idea that their naive daughter had been quietly documenting everything, initially out of a desire to help. But now it felt like something else entirely. As I spread the papers across my bedspread, a strange calm settled over me. The trembling in my hands stopped. My breathing became steady and deliberate. Each document told a story. Not the story my parents had been telling the family, but the real story. The story of secret accounts, questionable business practices, and financial decisions that would make their adult trust meeting very interesting indeed. I traced my finger along the edges of bank statements that showed transfers to offshore accounts. I reread emails where my father discussed creative accounting with his business partner. I studied loan documents with forged signatures and falsified income reports. That night, sitting in the soft glow of my desk lamp surrounded by evidence of their deception, I whispered to myself, "Enough is enough." But it wasn't a declaration of surrender. It was a promise that their betrayal wouldn't go unanswered, that their cruel words would have consequences they never saw coming. Over the next few weeks, I moved through our house like a ghost, quiet and unassuming while I gathered more information. Every morning, I would kiss my parents goodbye as they left for work, and every evening, I would ask about their day with genuine interest. They seemed pleased by my apparent acceptance of my place in the family hierarchy, never suspecting that their compliant daughter was methodically building a case against them. I made copies of everything, not just the documents I already had, but new ones I found each time they left me alone in the house. I photographed computer screens, forwarded emails to private accounts, and even recorded conversations when they thought I was out of earshot. Each piece of evidence was carefully cataloged and stored in multiple locations. The process became almost meditative. I would sit in my room each night, organizing documents by date and relevance, creating a timeline of their deception that stretched back nearly a decade. The pattern that emerged was stunning in its audacity. They had been systematically hiding assets, manipulating business records, and planning to cut me out of the family legacy while still expecting me to fund their lifestyle. But I wasn't acting out of anger anymore. That hot, desperate rage from the night of their ultimatum had crystallized into something much more dangerous, cold, calculated patience. Every insult they had thrown at me became fuel for my determination. Every dismissive glance became another reason to be thorough. I researched legal precedents, consulted online forums about financial fraud, and even had a few hypothetical conversations with lawyer friends about inheritance law. I learned about asset recovery, fiduciary duty, and the legal obligations of family business partnerships. Knowledge became my weapon, and I sharpened it every single day. As January melted into February, my parents seemed to relax around me. They interpreted my quiet compliance as acceptance, even going so far as to praise me for finally growing up and understanding my place. They had no idea that their obedient daughter was about to turn their world upside down. The annual family gala was approaching, the Hartwell Foundation charity event that our family had hosted for 15 years. It was our social crown jewel, the night when we displayed our success and generosity to the entire community. Local business leaders, politicians, and society figures would all be there, along with the extended family members who rarely saw us except at these grand occasions. The irony was perfect. They wanted to celebrate the family name and legacy in front of everyone who mattered to them, never suspecting that their greatest threat was the daughter they had written off as weak and naive. I volunteered to help with the planning, offering to handle the technical aspects, the sound system, the projector for the presentation, the lighting. They were delighted to let me take care of the boring details, while they focused on schmoozing and networking. They even complimented me on finally finding a way to contribute meaningfully to family events. If only they knew what kind of presentation I was actually preparing. The night of the gala arrived with all the pomp and circumstance our family was known for. The ballroom at the Grandview Hotel shimmered under crystal chandeliers, their light catching the gold thread in the tablecloths and casting rainbow sparkles across the walls. The air hummed with conversation, laughter, and the gentle clinking of champagne glasses as 300 guests mingled in their finest attire. I stood near the back of the room, watching my parents work the crowd like the seasoned performers they were. My father, resplendent in his custom tuxedo, regaled a group of city councilmen with stories of his business acumen. My mother, glittering in diamonds that I now knew were purchased with fraudulent loan money, charmed potential donors with her gracious smile and tales of our family's charitable work. They looked so confident, so secure in their position at the top of our small city's social hierarchy. They had no idea that I was carrying a small remote control in my clutch, the same remote that would control the evening's presentation equipment. As the dinner concluded and the formal program began, my father took the stage to deliver his annual address about family values, business integrity, and community responsibility. The crowd applauded warmly, and I could see the satisfaction glowing on his face as he basked in their approval. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying easily through the sound system I had personally tested that afternoon, "tonight we celebrate not just our family's success, but our commitment to transparency, honesty, and the values that built this community." The applause was enthusiastic. I waited for it to die down before I pressed the first button on my remote. The large screen behind my father flickered to life, displaying what the audience expected, a slide showing the Hartwell Foundation's charitable contributions over the years. But after a few seconds, the image changed. Bank statements appeared on the screen, clearly showing transfers from the foundation's accounts to my parents' personal offshore accounts. A murmur rippled through the audience. My father, still facing forward, didn't immediately realize what was happening behind him. But I could see the confusion spreading across the faces in the crowd, the way conversation stopped mid-sentence as people tried to process what they were seeing. I pressed another button. Email exchanges filled the screen. Messages between my father and his business partner, discussing how to hide assets from both the IRS and the family. The timestamp showed these emails were sent just days after their ultimatum to me. Now my father heard the change in the crowd's energy. He turned around, and I watched his face drain of color as he saw his private correspondence displayed in 18-point font for 300 people to read. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no sound came out. The next slide showed loan documents with forged signatures. My signature, specifically, on papers I had never seen before. They had been using my identity to secure fraudulent loans while simultaneously telling me I was too naive to understand business. The room was completely silent now, except for the soft hum of the projector. Every eye was fixed on the screen, and I could feel the shift in energy as understanding dawned on the audience. These weren't just business mistakes or accounting errors. This was systematic fraud, carried out over years while my parents presented themselves as pillars of the community. I had saved the best for last. The final slide showed the actual family trust documents, not the version they had planned to present at their private meeting, but the original version that named me as the primary beneficiary of both the business and the foundation, the version they had planned to alter without my knowledge. My father's legs seemed to give out, and he grabbed the podium for support. In the audience, I could see my mother's face, frozen in an expression of pure terror as she realized the magnitude of what was being exposed. I walked slowly toward the stage, my heels clicking against the marble floor in the absolute silence. When I reached the microphone, I looked out at the sea of shocked faces, some horrified, some fascinated, all of them riveted by the drama unfolding before them. "Everything you said about me," I said softly, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system, "was a lie." I let each word hang in the air, giving the audience time to absorb not just what they had seen, but what it meant. "You called me naive, but I documented everything. You called me weak, but I had the strength to seek the truth. You called me ungrateful, but I was grateful enough to protect the family legacy from those who would destroy it." The aftermath was swift and merciless. By morning, the local newspaper had picked up the story. The state attorney general's office opened an investigation. The foundation's board called an emergency meeting to distance themselves from my parents' actions. Business partners began severing ties, and the family's carefully cultivated reputation crumbled like a house of cards. I didn't celebrate their downfall. There was no joy in watching the people who raised me face the consequences of their betrayal, even though they had earned every bit of their suffering. Instead, I felt a quiet satisfaction, the kind that comes not from revenge, but from justice finally being served. The house that had once felt like a prison became mine by legal right, just as the trust documents had always intended. The business was placed under new management, while the investigation continued. The foundation was restructured with proper oversight to ensure the charitable work could continue without the taint of corruption. As for my parents, they faced not just legal consequences, but social exile. The community they had worked so hard to impress turned their backs with the same swiftness they had once used to court favor. It was a reminder that respect built on deception is no respect at all. I was packing the last of my belongings from my childhood bedroom when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was brief but chilling. "You think this is over? You have no idea what's coming next." I stared at the screen for a moment, then smiled. They still didn't understand. I wasn't the naive little girl they had tried to control and manipulate. I was someone who had learned to fight back with intelligence, patience, and the truth. Whatever came next, I would be ready. After all, I had already survived the worst betrayal imaginable, being erased by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. Everything else was just another challenge to overcome. The game had just begun, and for the first time in my life, I was playing to win. Me like a slap.